we have the always fabulous Angela Woosley. You know you're pretty special when you get to the point of calling a mortician, doula, educator, and celebrant meets podcast producer of The Morgue You Know as your friend, which I am grateful to call Angela Woosley. She is one of the most heart-forward, wisdom-embodying instructors of all things death that I know. I've been a huge fangirl since learning about her from you about an obituary 101 class that you taught quite a while ago. I, during that class, got to know so much, and I was so excited to know her, even more so when Cynthia and I attended the moderated discussion with Katrina Spade of Recompose. Shout out to Cynthia for going with me. And on to other fun stuff. Green Endings with Angela Woosley. And we'll see if this behaves for Kate.
Share. You're sharing?
I'm sharing.
We're sharing.
Beautiful.
Hi. I should have just changed the name here, but I didn't. But, it's the same thing. I can't believe you neglected to mention, since obviously I love puns with The Morgue You Know. You should see my sweet title card for it, all done by me in Canva, very close to my heart. But I also have a TikTok, Brushes with Death, where, I brush my teeth in the morning and then share a fun fact about death and dying with my natural bed head, which is the best part of it. The best part of it. Both the podcast and the TikTok are kind of on, I don't know, extended whatever. But so I thought we would talk a little bit about natural options at the end of life, or greener endings, ways to take this mortality awareness talk that we've been talking about and thinking about, and kind of apply to, what do you want your final footprint to be? What impact do you want to have on the earth after you die? So I just want to caution you that this does have photographs of shrouds and caskets and cremation equipment, bone fragments, as well as people after death. So if you feel like you're going to be a little sensitive to that, that's fine. Know thyself, and you can, or just look at my beautiful face. Just stare at me the entire time. So we're going to talk about 4 things: green burial, water cremation, natural organic reduction, and home funerals. And most of these are legal in Minnesota. So as you can see, the darker line on this bar graph is Americans 65 and up. That number is increasing, thanks baby boomers, and it will continue to increase for several years. And at the same time, interest in green funerals of people of all ages is also increasing. If you've lived in Minnesota and talked to anybody about being dead, you've probably heard somebody say, "Oh, just put me in a gunny sack and throw me in a ditch," which is a very Midwestern sentiment. And that's pretty close to green burial. So that's the first thing that we're going to talk about is green burial. There's generally 3 categories of green cemeteries. A hybrid cemetery is one that currently exists as a cemetery, the kind that you're used to walking in, but then they have a portion or a section of their cemetery that allows for a more natural burial, which we'll define in a minute. Sometimes it's also just, we'll allow it anywhere in the cemetery, but we'll do different practices. So the natural burial or natural cemetery is a cemetery that is exclusively green burials. So they don't offer conventional burials. And then a conservation burial ground is something that's kind of like that next level, where not only will it have a lighter impact on the earth, but your burial will be a part of larger conservation efforts for a space. So there is a group in the Twin Cities, Land Conservation Natural Burial, that is working to bring conservation burial to the metro area. because that's currently the type of cemetery that we don't have. There are natural cemeteries, and there's also a current moratorium on green burial right now. But my understanding of that, and I'm not a lawyer, is that, ask me where I learned that. My current understanding of that is that affects people who want to open a new cemetery and have it be green. But a currently existing cemetery could offer hybrid or natural options right now if they wanted. And politics is the reason why we have that. So what constitutes a green burial? Usually it has no embalming, so no formaldehyde-based preservative chemicals being introduced into your body. Usually either a shroud or a sustainable casket. So we're avoiding like a hardwood pecan casket. We're avoiding an 18 gauge or stainless steel casket. Those things have a big environmental cost to produce. No outer burial container, which is usually the sticking point for most cemeteries, more than anything else. And an outer burial container, you might have heard it called a vault. Most of them that you're thinking of are vaults, but the one that isn't is a grave liner, which is a concrete box with drainage holes in the bottom, and the lid just rests on top. So the purpose of an outer burial container is to keep the ground level in the cemetery. So when you walk through a cemetery, you'll see nice straight rows of headstones. If you walk through a very old cemetery, you'll look through the aisle and it'll be rolling waves. And that's from where everything that has been buried in that space has broken down over time. And so an outer burial container, even a grave liner, prevents the earth from shifting, and it makes it easier to mow. And that's literally the only reason why cemeteries require it, is it's a lot to maintain. So yeah. And then the other feature would be a more sustainable marker. So markers are often bronze or granite, occasionally marble. They used to be limestone. But a more sustainable marker would be something like planting a native bush or tree, bringing in a natural boulder, just setting it there, or putting a GPS marker in the ground, and turning visiting the cemetery into a nice geocaching event. So most of the people that I talk to who are interested in these greener endings, some or all of those things are important. And you can skip any one of these things and your ending will be greener. You don't have to do all of these things and you failed at being green and death, right? Like it's kind of everything in these spaces is a bit choose your own adventure. What feels right to you? What sounds right to you? We'll talk about some resistance to other natural disposition options. And usually that objection is, well, then don't do that. Pick something else from the long list of disposition options. So if any of those aspects feel right to you, like I'd really prefer that my death that I wasn't filled with formaldehyde, right? Then don't do that. You can, all of these things are legal within the state of Minnesota. There's no state law requiring embalming, an outer burial container, sustainable marker, or casket. I saw you raise your eyebrow at embalming not being required. So usually you can avoid embalming if you don't want it. You can even have a public visitation on private property, and a funeral home counts as private property. You can have a public visitation on private property without being embalmed. We use things like Techni ice or dry ice. Techni ice is like a big 8.5 by 11 sheet of plastic that is flexible, and you fill it with water and you put it in your freezer, and you place it on your body to keep it cool. But you can touch it with your bare hands, unlike dry ice, which no touchy. So, don't do that. any questions about the features of a green burial or what constitutes a green burial? Is this, yeah?
The natural burial
Mhm.
sites in Minnesota, which ones are those right now?
So it depends on if you are concerned about them being certified by the Green Burial Council. So currently there are no natural cemeteries, exclusively natural, that are certified by the Green Burial Council.
Okay.
But Prairie Oaks Memorial Eco Gardens in Amber Grove Heights is technically a natural cemetery.
Do you have to be embalmed if you're being cremated?
Nope. Nope. You just about never have to be embalmed unless it's going to take longer than 3 days if you have a refrigerated space, which most funeral homes have access to, or 6 days if we do have access to that refrigeration. So if we've got up to 6 days to kind of get those pieces in order, and that clock starts ticking once that person is released from their place of death. So if a person has died and they need to be cared for by a medical examiner to have information come out through their body of how they died, it wouldn't start on their time of death. It would start once the medical examiner has transferred them into funeral home or family's care. Yeah, good questions. So this is an example of a sustainable container. This is a Mourning Dove studio. It didn't switch. It switched here.
Go back and forth.
You go back and forth. Are you stuck?
The time is stuck on there too.
Oh, it froze. It froze. Oh, tech support. Haha. Thank you, Kate.
You're welcome.
So this is an example of a green burial casket. This is technically a coffin. Anybody know why?
Because it has a removable lid.
Oh, shape.
Oh,
Shape. So a casket is a rectangle from the top, and a coffin is anthropoidal, which means it bumps out for your elbows and bumps back in for your toes, sometimes called a toe pincher. Toe pincher.
It looks like marble.
It's what?
Looks like marble.
It is cardboard.
That's cool.
It is straight up cardboard. This is from Mourning Dove Studio, which is going through like a reinvigoration thing. So I can't even currently get them, but I like them best. And when the National Home Funeral Alliance had their conference in Chaska a few years back, they had like a sample home vigil, and they put together one of those for it. So that's great to have. And in this case, they've just draped it with greenery and flowers and placed it on a bier that can be carried to the graveside. This is another example of shroud. And I say shroud very loosely because a shroud is just a sheet that you wrap a dead person in. So this shroud was her favorite sheet. With strips of her least favorite sheet that we used as ties. This is also in Wisconsin on her son's land. So that's an example of an extremely natural burial. Although I will say, her favorite sheet was a lot of polyester. So you know what? Different shades, right? It doesn't have to be like unbleached organic cotton muslin. Like, and in a way, this is also green because it's reused, right? It's not like purchased just for that occasion. So, yeah, this is her son's cremated remains in that gravel pile there. So then her two remaining sons and their families and me all lowered her into that space and filled it in. Those are the ropes that we use to lower it. So just like that. I'm going to move on to water cremation. Okay. Anybody heard of water cremation?
Alkaline hydrolysis.
Alice, I know you have. Gosh. AKA alkaline hydrolysis, green cremation is what Bradshaw funeral homes call it. Resumation is what the people who make resumators call it. And aquamation is another brand name. So resumation and aquamation are brand names. Water cremation is a pretty common generic, but if you want to get sciencey, it's alkaline hydrolysis. So
never pull that out when I need it.
alkaline hydrolysis.
Sound really smart.
Just say water cremation. Just say water cremation. The great thing about, there's so many great things about water cremation. So a lot of people say, well, if we aren't going to bury because that's going to have such an impact, I will choose cremation, and cremation has a lower carbon footprint. That is absolutely true. But water cremation has an even lower footprint than flame-based cremation. It has a quarter of the footprint of flame cremation. It uses 1/8 the energy of flame cremation. And it does not release any mercury in dental fillings into the atmosphere, which flame cremation does. Mercury has a very low vapor point, and it just goes right up the flue. The other really cool thing is that we can recover more cremated remains, more bone fragments from that process. So what happens in flame cremation, you're probably familiar with. A person goes into a chamber, direct heat and flame are applied to their person, and it reduces their body to bone fragments. What we call ashes is actually bone fragments that then need to be processed down to that texture that we recognize as cremated remains. In water cremation, instead, you're still going into a chamber, but it's a chamber that looks kind of like an iron lung, right? A big chamber, right? I think of like those, like how you spin something to get through in a submarine. It reminds me of that. And then instead of direct heat and flame, they use water, hence the name, a strong base, potassium hydroxide, and a little bit of pressure. So a little bit of natural gas is used for that pressure, and it returns your body to the same things. So people say, well, doesn't the rest of you go into the sewer? Yes, so does your poop. It's okay. Like that's what sewers do. And that effluent, as it's called, is neutralized, pH balanced before it returns to the sewer system. And instead of going into the sewage system, your other option with flame cremation is to go up the flue. So you're going to have something else besides bone fragments in both of those cases, that having a lower carbon footprint, having a lower impact, and also something that our public works systems are used to processing and working with. And the reason why we can get even more cremated remains back is that at the end of a flame cremation process, they go in and they kind of brush out all of those bone fragments, brush them into a tank, and then they wave a magnet over that to get out any, if you had a screw in your hip from a hip replacement, things like that, and then they process it down. With water cremation, nothing is going up a chimney. So there's more bone fragments there, and also it's contained, only the effluent is going into the sewer system. So it's a lot easier to bring out all of those bone fragments. So the carbon footprint comparison, a lot of this you see at the beginning is container production. In water cremation, not only do you not need an outer or an alternative container, but you can't even be wearing most clothing. Only silk and wool can go through that process, because the process digests protein. So everyone's like, oh, so then cotton is not a protein, cotton is a fiber. So silk, wool, birthday suit. Those are your options. And birthday suit is free. Like you paid for it when you got born, right? It's prepaid. The fuel consumption is the biggest part it's 201 out of the 243 kilograms CO2 equivalents of flame-based cremation. And with green cremation, the largest part of that is also fuel, but it's only 25 kilogram CO2 equivalents. So that's pretty much water cremation. So I also thought I would share some pictures. This is Bradshaw's water cremation facility. They call it green cremation in Stillwater, Minnesota. This is what you walk into at the very beginning, and this is a water feature. So, you know, it's very sensory. It's very much designed to kind of put you more at ease and help you feel calm and present and centered. This is the actual chamber itself. You can see why it kind of reminds me of like a submarine, right? An iron lung. That's the inside of the chamber. So this, that tray is what would be brought out and that person placed onto that tray. And you see kind of the little nubs of heating coils underneath. That would be where that 25 kilograms of CO2 are going through, is warming that slightly. This is what would be returned or what would be brought out of the chamber at the conclusion of the water cremation process. You can also see that not only are these pretty recognizable chunks of bone, which is true for both flame and water cremation, but also you can see how porous they look. With flame cremation, what comes out of the cremation chamber is closer to the color of this metal basket. Because they've been exposed to heat and flame, they're kind of charred. In this case, these are bone white. They're pure white bone fragments, and they are so porous that they are powdery. Like you could pick up one of these, you could pick up what looks like the end of a femur and it would just, yeah. So they're very, very, very powdery when you go to scatter them or you know, like, they don't scatter them like sand. It's like scattering like baby powder. Very, very light
Just
and
be
fine.
careful not to do it into the wind.
Right. Do not Big Lebowski yourself with any cremated remains scattering. And honestly, I've even had funeral directors from Bradshaw recommend wearing an N95. We've all got them handy. So if you're gonna scatter, might as well. I mean, unless that's the way that you want to carry them with you. I mean, who am I to judge?
Question.
So, yeah.
How long does the water cremation process take?
That's an excellent question. So the flame, start with not answering your question. The flame-based cremation process, if it's just a simple alternative container, can take about 90 minutes. Also depends on the weight of the person. Water cremation takes a few hours. In the case of flame cremation, you need to let all of the cremated remains cool to a more human temperature in order to process them. In water cremation, you actually have to dry the bone fragments before you process them. And that can be just au naturel, air dried, or you can kiln dry, which really means oven drying. I think at Bradshaw, they technically have like a clothes dryer that they put a rack in. And so like they're not tumbling, they're just sitting there and then, you know, so whatever works for that.
Were families there for the body going in?
They can be. That's true for any type of cremation. Family can be present for the initiation of that process. In some cultures and families, that's the only way to be. And then a lot of us, you know, Scandinavian Midwesterners are like, oh gosh, no, I just couldn't. Well, you know, it's another point of ritual possibly. Okay.
Do you mind going back to the Bradshaw viewing area?
Mm-hmm.
So after my sister passed, she unfortunately did have to stay with a medical examiner for about 30 days. When I was offered the opportunity with Bradshaw to do a second viewing of her privately, they brought her into this space. It's a separate entrance from the funeral home, so it's almost like a little Zen garden meditative walk. They had Allie laid out on a medical gurney. They had her in a hospital gown, and they offered to do fingerprints of my sister, her handprints, and then they helped with the hair clipping. And the sweetest thing I will say about Anne, who works at Bradshaw, we had brought the dog with because we were planning to do a quick trip up north. And she not only held onto my dog while he went crazy and I went in to see my sister, she recommended we bring the dog into the space. And watching him try to nose her face and wiggle his tail, knowing her smell, that space holds sacred space for me. It is very powerful.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you shared that. It's
Yeah.
true. It's true. When you go into spaces like that, there's a very different sense. This is so radically different from most viewing areas at crematories. Even the one that I use, Jason did an incredible job of paying attention to heart aesthetics, if that makes any sense, when creating that. Yeah. So let me skip ahead to natural organic reduction, which some of you are familiar with because you went to this thing in January with Katrina Spade. So it's also called NOR, which is the abbreviation of natural organic reduction. You might have heard it called human composting or the brand name Recompose. There are several other places, not Homeward Bound. They're Return Home. Nope, that's the one that's in the middle of. Anyway, there are other organizations, funeral homes that are offering this in a few different states, but Recompose was the first in Washington State. So all of these you can find on the Recompose website, but she does a great job of explaining her own business. Go figure. So the coolest thing about Recompose, what they do is a person is transformed into a cubic yard of soil. A cubic yard is about a pickup truck bed worth. So it's not like you get a little urn of soil, but they can also give you an urn of soil, or that's that amount. But it's a lot of soil that comes out of this. So it can go home with you for plants. Notice that it says plants and gardens. And then later when it talks about forests, so it can help with conservation efforts. Don't grow vegetables with it. Just a thought. But it's totally nutrient rich soil. It's absolutely soil. So it's just a little I mean, you can just a little soil and greeny.
Eating a little bit of that person.
Yeah, sure would.
Do you have to, if you do put it on your land, do you have to declare that when you sell it? Like if there's a buried body, you have to,
Nope.
right?
If you bury somebody on your land, if it's legal for you to do that, and you bury somebody on your land and then you sell it, yes, you have to disclose that. If you scatter cremated remains on your own property, you wouldn't have to disclose that. And this is very similar. So there's in cremated remains and in soil from the Recompose process, there's no DNA left of a person. So this isn't a person anymore. It's soil, so you wouldn't have to disclose that at all. Yeah. But the lady in the red shroud, if her son ever moves, he absolutely has to declare that a human person is buried on his land, and also he can't do anything to disturb those burials. That's a cemetery. You've established a cemetery when you legally bury someone on land. So an overview of her whole process. So she developed it. It's very similar to essentially what's happening on the forest floor, right? Like that smell of the forest floor that I like so much, that's decay. What I like about that, I mean, that's not initially why I liked it, but it doesn't hurt that it's the process, a slow process of decay. What happens is that they're just speeding up that process. So I'll hold that thought. Just like you can go either flame or water and witness the initiation of that process, you can also go to a laying in ceremony at a Recompose facility or at most of these facilities that offer human composting. It is before they are placed into the vessel itself. They are placed in that vessel surrounded by wood chips, alfalfa, and straw, and other proprietary things. And then it's closed and the process begins. So the vessels that they have actually slowly rotate over the course of about 6 weeks to return your body to soil. Let's see here. The soil itself cures for an additional 2 to 5 weeks, and then and they also actually have to do the same thing of waving a magnet over it and reducing or pulling out any foreign bodies. But yeah, it can nourish gardens, conserve land. So Recompose themselves has an agreement with a national forest or a forest in conservation efforts, and they can use that soil for all of that. The forests are constantly needing fresh soil, especially nutrient-dense, nutrient-rich soil. And when you're conserving land, you're not just trying to reduce or stop any detriment to it, but you're like trying to pull out invasive species, and you then want to enrich the new things that you're planting there. So, and then let's see here. The soil can restore forest. It sequesters carbon. So just like trees do, right? You're nourishing other life. So this is, I think, this is what the process or what the facility originally was intended to look like. I think this is actually an architect's drawing or rendering. But this is an example of the actual laying in, though that is not an actual human that was staged for photo purposes, but that's kind of what it looks like, right? And so to me, this looks like a hybrid between going to a crematory and going to a cemetery. It still feels very earthy. The straw and alfalfa help with that, but then the place that you're at resembles closer, is more closely emblematic of a Yep.
Is it like, so they're basically feeding the bacteria are doing the decomposing just like they would in the forest floor. All these like things, these critters are just eating you up, and they're speeding that up with, I'm assuming, temperature.
Right. So human composting may not be a very sexy phrase for it, but it's kind of accurate that if you've composted, it's a little warm, you're turning things over, right? It's, yeah.
I'm curious if there's like gas byproduct, just like regular composting, if you can use that as a form of fuel, if it's kind of like I'm curious what kind of emissions it gives off.
Yeah, it's not quite as, it doesn't emit the same, like it's not like, well, I've used a compost bin and that created some heat and gas, so this must create more. It's not really like a manifold process in terms of that. So I don't know that there's enough to really use for any other purposes. But yeah, it's definitely vented, and yeah. So the funny thing, before I go into home funerals, I think to me the funny thing about human composting, and it's kind of it's just a sped up version of natural burial. So lovingly, I say, Recompose is a middleman between you and turning into dirt. You can turn into dirt just with the tools you have in your own gut. That's literally why we decompose, is that the first part of our decomposition comes from our own gut flora. But without it, with just a natural breakdown of all of our enzymes and proteins and things like that. So this is just a sped up version of a natural burial. She designed this process specifically for urban areas where a natural cemetery is too far away, right? So if you die in Manhattan and you want a natural burial, you will need to drive several hours to get to one. And so every mile you drive or fly, because she also has people who will fly their bodies out to Washington for this process. Every mile you drive or fly negates a portion of the greenness of your ending. So that's another thing to consider. And I don't want to, I'm not trying to, you know, I'm not trying to downgrade that, but like I said before, when you come across the thing that sounds right to you, it just sounds right. It sounds like the best option for you. And it doesn't have to be the absolute lowest carbon footprint in order to be valid. But the lowest carbon footprint is open a hole in the earth and put a dead person in that. And then everything else from there is going to have a slightly higher carbon footprint. But the difference between hole in the ground, dead body in it, and conventional burial is so vast. There's lots of room for improvement. That's why I kind of mention it that way.
Do you think laws will ever evolve, or do you see, I mean, you're more tapped into this than I am, or do you see any conversation around it being allowed for there to be more than one body in a space? Or rotating plots, or having a period of years, or even just...
Because of the ways that most cemeteries operate, I don't see the temporary cemetery space being really happening. It happens in New Orleans.
I was just gonna mention
Yeah,
that.
it absolutely.
Yes, the condos.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
they still have some that are like a family mausoleum where you go in, what is it, a year and a day that you get, and then they push you to the back?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right,
So-
and then rotate them.
Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
shelf inside a mausoleum, and it's not at the bottom. It's kind of at eye height. You put the person in on that shelf. There's a space at the back of that mausoleum inside, and then after a year and a day, they have kind of a ceremony, and they push the rest of you to the hole in the back, and your bones join your other family members' bones. And they also had others that were just the little oven door shaped ones that were kind of for anybody. But it's so uncommon, and it's so antithetical to this like American individualism and exceptionalism, right?
This is my space.
Yeah, I don't necessarily see that happening. But if you're in a conservation burial ground where there's less need for platting the spaces and, you know, particular record keeping, it can be like, she's under this primrose somewhere, right? That I don't know if that's if that would be the same requirement, but I think there was another part to your question in terms of
No, that was kind of it.
More than one person buried
more than
together?
one person.
Is that
Yeah,
what you
more
were-
than
yeah.
one
Because
person.
they don't, like in Europe, some places they bury bodies vertically,
Mhm.
or the space is for one person for a certain amount of time, and then they'll
Mhm.
bury another body there.
Mhm.
And when I think of wanting to return to the earth,
Mhm.
but then returning to the earth in a space that's never going to be
Mhm.
used again, and now it's almost
Mhm.
no touchy.
Mhm. Mhm.
I like recompose because you can still become this organic material that feeds the earth without taking space.
Mhm.
That can never be reused
Mhm.
because of our laws.
Yeah, and I don't know if a conservation natural burial ground would be able to set rules that differ. But you would be so nourishing, right? Like
Yeah.
one human being can be so nourishing to future forms of life that, you know, even if we're next to each other, you know,
Yeah.
that forest or that land would be, that prairie would be in perpetual conservation. So it's not just your physical contribution, it's also your financial contribution that will ensure that can stay in conservation and be restored to its natural state. So it does have those other benefits too. Home funerals. I had to sing that apparently.
It's a jingle in there somewhere.
It's a jingle. It's a jingle. So home funerals. This is also legal in every state. It is legal in every state in the union to care for your own dead. Usually a bit of a shock to people, except us weirdos. So this is an example from the National Home Funeral Alliance's website of a person who was shrouded and kept at home and lovingly cared to, right? And home vigils or just extended vigils, waiting some period of time. Anyone who's gone through like doula training, we talk about slowing down. We talk about letting our bodies kind of catch up with our minds and things like that. And having that person at home gives you a chance to do that whenever you are feeling ready to do that. If I'm caring for a person who's died at my funeral home, I'm not going to be there 24 hours a day. And so if you wake up at 2 a.m. and you're like, oh, I want to be with this person, as accommodating and kind as I am, I'm just not there, right? So if you're able to have a person at home or a home-like space, anytime the need strikes you, you can spend time with that person's body. And it's really common, if you've worked in these spaces, to have immediately bereaved people say, I swear I just saw her chest move out of the corner of my eye. I feel like she's just about to take another breath. Those are really normal things to feel, right? Because the only experience you've had with this person is standing upright, breathing in and out. Right? So when you're then with them, that disbelief, that incredulity is a part of your processing, your ability to reconnect and understand the change that this person has gone through. And the longer you can spend with them and just go ahead and stare at their chest, right? It's really not happening. It's really not happening. They're really not breathing. And until your body says, oh, okay, they're different now. And the changes that happen over time to their body, that cooling of their skin, the settling of the blood to the dependent areas so that you see less color in them, that coupled with not seeing their chest rise and fall, all of those are gradual signs that you can key into, and then your body can slow down and understand this on a different level. So it's really powerful. You could play music at a vigil, right? We talked about this happening before death. Sorry, do you mind? Forward. Playing music in, near, on, around a person. All of those same elements that happen before the person dies can also be incorporated into a vigil after death. I had one service where I met with Mimi before she died, months before she died. Fiery, feisty French teacher and poet, and her husband was there, and her kids and their husbands were there. And she said, I want this. I want the home funeral. I want you guys to come back and care for my body. And I, invite everyone into these spaces. And when she died, they did not want to do that. They were like, nope, she can get out of this house. That is not good for us. And so it wasn't right for them, even though that was something that she invited, right? We can invite all we want, but people in grief are going to do what feels rightest for them. And so what we did instead is we had really extended periods of visitation with her after she died at the funeral home. So people could come and go as they please. We could slow down. It wasn't this, you have an hour and then stop crying and go home, right? And, you can't just go in and cry on cue. You could also include scents and sights and sounds and all of that. So being able to incorporate ritual of sharing rose petals with this person. In this case, another feature that you'll notice is that their face is not visible at all. So they are essentially fully shrouded. And that if a person doesn't look amazing after death, you can still have a vigil with that person's body. You could have their hands exposed. So you can go up and hang on to their hands and say, I know I can't handle seeing her face, but boy, I know her hands. I know this so much. That body is the only interface we've had with that person's soul, right? So it means a lot, even though the changes happened. You can decorate these coffins and caskets. This was all hand painted and drawn by families. His favorite FDR pillow was there. And yeah, offerings, candles, incense, favorite objects can all be incorporated. And what you have on hand is often all you need supplies wise for caring for that person.
Do you have to do like the
Mhm.
tricks
Mhm.
for the home, like the mouth closed and the eyes? Do you do that?
Sure. Do you have
If
to?
it's necessary?
No, you don't have to do any of those things. Again, so when we were going through Nina's meditation, she talked about your eyes are relaxed so that they're probably a little bit open, even though your eyes aren't open, right? Your jaw might be relaxing. Those signs of relaxation can be really affirming to family members who see them and think, wow, they're really relaxed, so relaxed, their jaw is relaxed. And to other people, it can be a little off-putting. So yeah, you should definitely care for their body to some degree, but what all that means varies from person to person. The National Home Funeral Alliance has a free online PDF guidebook to walk you through any and all of those processes. Again, it's just whatever feels right for you. So if you haven't closed their jaw before rigor mortis sets in, it's going to be a little harder to do that. So instead of the pillow technique, so you're talking about rolling up a pillow and putting that under their chin to hold their jaw closed. If that's not going to work because rigor mortis has also already set in. And so when rigor mortis sets in, it tightens and stiffens the muscle fibers themselves. So if a person's jaw has gone into rigor open and you go to close it, you will likely be able to move it and close it. But what you'll happen is you'll have all of this movement in both directions. It won't stiffen back up, and it's not like, and then it closes. It's you either have rigor or you have broken the rigor. And that just means working out the muscle itself. So if my hand was clenched like this and we broke the rigor in my fingers, it wouldn't just stay this way, right? Because
there's no,
there's nothing holding it, nothing holding it in that direction. So after rigor, what you can do to close the mouth is take a long piece of dental floss, take two, and tie one around a tooth, and then tie another one around a lower tooth, and then tie those things together. And that will help hold a jaw closed. If the person doesn't have teeth, you can do other things like the old-timey I have a toothache, hanky around the head, those sorts of things. But yeah, the NHFI guidebook has a lot of tricks and tools to make that happen. But there's nothing that says you have to do any of those things. The only thing I would really recommend is emptying their bladder and bowels. Just by pushing. You know how that happens, right? This is Sally. Sally's family made a shroud out of this incredible rainbow tie-dyed fabric. They took, normal width fabric and two long sheets, just sewed one seam right down the middle, and now they had a shroud. That they shrouded her on point. But what's tied all around her are these muslin prayer strips. So in advance of her death, all of her family, her friends, her community got together, and they each, if they could, they did had a crafting party at the church. And if they couldn't get there because they lived far away, they sent plain muslin strips to everyone in the community, and they decorated them and sent them back. And so we, this is just a cot. She's just on a cot because we were going right to the cemetery from here. Or no, she was coming back to the funeral home and then to the cemetery. So she's on a cot, and then on that cot is a rough wood trundle. And a trundle is just a fancy word for a board. They had two layers. So it was a board completely under her, another board under that, and then in between it was kind of like air with supports, not explaining this well at all. So the way that we wrapped it all the way around her is they had a pushing stick. That's a technical term. And they took the strip, pushed it underneath, and then drew out the two ends. And then it was around the trundle and her shroud all at the same time.
That's so cool.
And I mean, these were so beautiful. They were each was particular to her experience. I don't know if I can zoom in. That looks like a plus sign. So there's a hand of cards. There's handwriting. There's bits of poetry and quotes that were really appropriate for her. So there's a lot of thought can go into home funerals in a way that the funeral directors don't often know how to suggest, because every individual is unique, right? So if we have other ideas, we can suggest them, but I'd never seen anything like this. I wouldn't have thought to suggest it to them. Let's see here. So I feel like I kind of flew past that in terms of things, but we're kind of at an hour. So for more information about Green Burial, talk to the Green Burial Council. My funeral home is certified by the Green Burial Council as a natural funeral provider. You can talk to Land Conservation Natural Burial, finding them on Facebook, Green Cremation by Bradshaw, the Minnesota NOR Action Group. We just have a email at this time and have occasionally regular meetings to work to legalize NOR in the state, because it was introduced in the last session. It needs a little bit of work to get sign on from funeral directors, and then they'll be like, yeah, sure, I don't care, as long as they've got training. Recompose has a lot of information about that. I really recommend going to the NHFA website to get their guidebook. It's free. It is donation based to improve accessibility. So if you can offer a donation to pay it forward in a way, that's cool. And you can also come to my website for some resources, though I haven't really updated it in a while. I have all of these on a little scrap of paper at the back. So yeah. Okay. Thanks. Woo. You're knocking me off the ball.
Thank you, Angela.
That was awesome.
You're amazing as usual.
I don't know about that.